guest, Mr. Seth Grossman, and he has agreed, he is from Jewish faith, and he has agreed to give us the Jewish perspective of Passover. And so, sir, we're honored by that. Please come. In
the book of Exodus, there's a passage that says on the first full moon after the spring, the equal days and equal nights, there's to be a special festival. That festival or that service is to take place in everybody's house. It's something that is, you don't go to the temple, not a synagogue, not a church, not to a priest or a minister. Every parent has the duty to tell this story to their children. It's called the story of the Passover. That's a translation of the word Pesach. It's very interesting because in English it's one of the only European languages that has a different word for Easter and Passover. In most European languages, the word for Passover and the word for Easter is one and the same. The Hebrew word is Pesach. In Spanish it's Pascua. Italian, Pascua. In French, I guess Pascal. Polish, Pascha. Russian, Pesach. I don't know all those languages, but it's the same holiday. And what is it that we remember? We remember that 1,200 years ago, the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt. And they cried out to God, and God rescued them. And on a particular, and first of all, God sent a message through Moses to Pharaoh saying the time to free these people has come. And God had 9 plagues to persuade and motivate the Egyptians to let their slaves go. But they didn't listen. And so on this particular night, 1,200 years ago, on the first full moon after the spring season, God gave a special message to the Jewish people. He said, get ready to go. You're going to leave. But before you leave, you must make a sacrifice. You must take the most perfect lamb among your flock, and you must sacrifice that perfect lamb and put the blood of that lamb on the doorpost of your house. Because tonight there will be a terrible disease through the land of Egypt. And the firstborn in every household will die, except for those households that put the blood of that perfect lamb on their doorpost. And so it was that the plague came, and the firstborn of all the Egyptians died. And then the Jewish people, finally the Egyptians said, you can go. And the Jewish people left. But then there was even one more miracle that had to happen. And that is the Egyptians changed their mind. They chased after the Hebrews to take them back into slavery. But there was a sea of reeds, a swampy area that was dry. And the Jews went across to safety. But when the Egyptians chased after them, they got stuck in the mud of the swamp. And then the waters came back and the Egyptians died. And so that's the story of the Passover. That's the story that every parent must tell every child every year on the night of the full moon after the spring. So it raises, and that's the story that we learn as children. But as adults, there's more to it in the Passover story. Why did God rescue this wretched tribe of slaves from Egypt? What was the purpose of it? Why them? Why did they deserve to be chosen to be liberated with these miracles for them and death for those who put them into slavery? And I think that we have to look at not only what the book of Exodus tells how the Jews got out of slavery, but the end of the book of Genesis tells us how the Jews got into slavery. And we don't talk about that very much. But basically, the 12 sons of Israel, 11 of them sold their brother Joseph into slavery. And then Joseph, of course, had a gift to predict the future. And he knew there would be 7 good years, and then there'd be 7 bad years. And it was important to save up the grain for the 7 good years, so you'd have it for the 7 bad years. But then we get into the world of maybe pay-to-play politics or insider trading, because Joseph doesn't tell everybody to save up for the 7 bad years. He just tells the king. And the king makes Joseph the number 2 guy in the kingdom. And the number 1 guy in the kingdom, Pharaoh, number 2 guy, they buy up all the grain when it's abundant, cheap. And then come the 7 bad news. And the ordinary people don't know about it. And what happens? Instead of saying, okay, we saved up for this grain, they sell the grain to the Egyptian farmers at the highest possible price. And so the Egyptian farmers paid with the money. And then they ran out of money. And then they gave up all their cattle. And they had no more cattle. And finally, the Egyptian farmers had nothing left but the land. So they gave up their land. And then they became serfs and tenants on their own land and had to pay a 20% income tax just to farm their own land. And so Pharaoh became rich and Joseph became rich. But the middle class of Egypt was wiped out and they became serfs in their own land. And then, of course, Joseph's brothers, the people of Israel, came down from Israel. And they got the food because they knew somebody in high places. And in fact, because they had a friend in the government, they got the best land of Goshen, with plenty of water. They didn't have to worry about paying the 20% tax. And they were treated specially. And what was the result of all this? The result of all this was, by having special privilege that no one else in Egypt had, that the Jews became slaves. Now, if you read the book of Exodus, it starts off, there arose in Egypt hundreds of years later a new king who did not know Joseph. And you say, boy, how ungrateful those Egyptians were. But when you understand how not treating everybody equally, not taking advantage of somebody in distress, how it led to disaster down the road, you see it in a different way. So what did God do besides take the people of Israel out of slavery? Another interesting detail of the holiday. Starting from Passover, we count 50 days to another holiday. The Greek word for 50 is Pentecost. And what do we celebrate 50 days after Passover? We celebrate the day that the Jews went to Mount Sinai and got laws. Laws that said, you shall not steal, you shall not lie, you shall not be jealous of what your neighbor has. You shall love your fellow like yourself. So that if everybody is treated equally, that the king has to follow the same law as the lowliest peasants. When you have that society where everybody is treated fairly and equally under the same law, then you won't have the hatred, you won't have the resentment, you won't have masters, and you won't have slaves. You have individuals who pursue their individual dreams safe and secure. So that's, I think, the message of the Jewish Passover. Thank you for letting me explain it.